Hello there, my name's Richard Willis. I'm a Senior Wildlife Ranger for Space for Shorebirds, which is Northumberland County Council's new ranger service, all to do with protecting the birds in the grasslands of the Northumberland coast. So what I'd like to talk to you today is a bit about the background of Space for Shorebirds. I think it's important to understand the background in order to understand the conservation decisions that we're making. And part two will detail our work that we've been involved in so far, and finally part three is just as to how you can get involved and potentially support Space for Shorebirds. So why was it necessary to create Space for Shorebirds? Well, Northumberland County Council have been drawing up its local plan for several years, and this is the plan that determines where development will happen within the next 15 years or so. Now, it was identified within that around about 12,000 properties will be potentially created within the coastal zone, and also there'll be new tourism accommodation within the coastal zone. And all of this, of course, increases the amount of coastal recreation and therefore the potential for disturbance at the coast. Now, as part of the creation of the local plan, Northumberland County Council is required to undertake a habitat regulations assessment. And this is where it looks to ensure that there won't be any adverse effects on the integrity of any internationally important designated sites. And obviously the sites that we're interested in here are sites that support the shorebird populations in the dune grasslands. And what it was identified was that without mitigation, that recreation could lead to disturbance impacts upon non-breeding shorebirds, a risk to nesting terns, shore nesting terns, and also a risk of spreading Piri Piri Bur further amongst the dune grasslands and damaging the dune grasslands further. So just to drill down a little bit on one of those designated sites, so here we've got the Northumberland Coast SPA, and an SPA means Special Protection Area, and that's the very highest level of conservation designation that we have within the UK. And the non-breeding shorebirds that SPA supports are turnstone and purple sandpiper. And as you can see, they've undergone a really significant decline since those sites were designated. So around about 29% for turnstone and 39% for purple sandpiper. So just to sort of make sure that you're all aware that the species on the left-hand side is purple sandpiper, and the species on the right-hand side of the frame is turnstone. Now, there seems to be a range of factors driving the declines, amongst which is actually climate change. But what has been shown over the last 10 or 15 years is that repeated flushing can actually have a population consequence for shorebirds, and can be a driver in declines. And what came ahead as really important for Space for Shorebirds is that the turnstone study done by Newcastle University has shown the importance of offshore refuges, and that where turnstones are in proximity to an offshore refuge such as Coquet Island and the Farne Islands, actually the populations have been much more robust. So this shows us fairly clearly that disturbance is actually already a drive for population decline, or at the very least we can say it's something which makes habitat suboptimal for non-breeding shorebirds within the county. So we know that really mitigation has to be carried out within the local plan in order to make the local plan acceptable. And that mitigation really has to take place across the whole of the coast, because the whole of the coastline is important for shorebirds, as can be seen by the designation of the Northumberland Shore SSI, which is pretty much the entire coastline of the county. So that you've got the two aforementioned species, and also redshank and golden plover, ring plover and sanderling, plus actually eider duck as well. And the other thing about the mitigation is that the mitigation must actually be at the coast itself. There's no good providing the mitigation away from the coast, because some of those birds just simply don't move inland at all, so turnstone and purple sandpiper in particular. And because of the county-wide nature of the impact, it's very difficult for developers to achieve any mitigation for themselves. So clearly, Northumberland County Council needs to provide within the plan a strategic mitigation which delivers mitigation across the entire range of the county. So fortunately, this has not been something which we are doing the first within the UK. Other authorities have dealt with this over the last 10 years. For example, Thames Basin Heaths have been attempting to protect their lowland heath sites from the impacts of recreational disturbance and other recreation impacts. And in the last 5 years, we've had Bird Aware come along, more recently Solent, and then Coast Project in Sunderland. And those are more dedicated to protecting non-breeding shorebirds and non-breeding wildfowl. So there's clearly a model there for us to follow, is to set up a ranger service which is to do with dealing with this pressure on the birds and really trying to influence and educate coast users just to try and reduce the impacts to the birds which are present on the coast. So how is Space for Shorebirds funded? Well, first of all, it's not funded by taxpayers. It's purely funded by housing and tourism development within the coastal zone. And it's actually been quite well received by house developers in that it takes away any vagaries to do with development and this issue. Previously, what had to be done was there was numbers of surveys in terms of visitor surveys, and also bird survey work which had to be carried out to support development. And now developers can actually make a simple single contribution to Space for Shorebirds, and that effectively deals with that matter, with the matter of coastal disturbance. So that's the background to Space for Shorebirds. So I think it's now time that we talk about the work that we've been involved in so far. So at its heart, Space for Shorebirds is all to do with engagement and education. And really, so people are absolutely key to what we're doing. If we're not reaching people and if we're not able to talk to people effectively, we can't do our jobs here. So it's all about reaching those coast users and not just those people who are interested in wildlife, and particularly dog owners, and I'll come on to that in a bit more detail later on. At the moment, we've got 2 ranges, and we cover an area from Seaton Sluice right the way up to Berwick upon Tweed. So in order not to sort of spread our resources too thinly, what we've done is created a number of focus areas. So these are areas which are particularly important for birds and particularly important for people. And we're really focusing our efforts in those areas. So areas like Boomer and Beadnell and Stag Rocks just north of Bamborough, and also New Biggin, for example. So the biggest aspect to do with engagement is face-to-face interaction. Talking to people about the birds, that's absolutely critical. So telling what we call our shorebird stories, and I'll mention one of these in a moment, and also sharing our guidance, which again I'll come to in a moment. But also having the difficult discussions at times. If we see disturbance actually in action intervening, talking to people about the birds and explaining that the birds, need space and that they need time to feed and they need time to rest, and that any sort of disturbance means that they'll potentially lose resources, and that can potentially mean life or death to them at the coast. Also, social media is incredibly important to us, particularly in this year of COVID. So using Instagram, Facebook and Twitter has been really quite successful for us so far. So if you're not already following us on those, please do so and give us your support. Something we'll be doing more in future is getting together for events. So these will be events like guided walks and birding for dog owners and attending dog training classes. So this is an important aspect of what we'll be doing. But so far this year, we'll have undertaken about 4 online talks. So that's a really useful way for us to engage with people during this period where getting together in big groups, isn't something that we can do. As well as those aspects, we've been using our traditional media and also contacting our parishes to get some information within our parish newsletters, and that's something that we'll be doing more and more over the next sort of 12 months. We've got a really good website, or I think it's really good, so do have a look at that. That gives a bit more detail on our shorebird stories, a bit more detail about what Space for Shorebirds is all about, and also that's got our blog on there as well. So do have a look at our website, that would be great. So I mentioned our shorebird stories, and here we've got the purple sandpiper. So it's a real rocky shore specialist. It's not a species which goes inland at all. You can always find it right on that rocky shore, on that real thin ribbon of habitat between the land and the sea. And we always talk about this species as being tough and yet vulnerable. It lives its life right on that rocky shore. It doesn't move anywhere else. And because of this, it's exposed to sort of the wet and the windy conditions right through the winter. So we always describe it as being really tough. But because it is so wedded to that thin band of habitat, it's also very, very, very vulnerable, because if it gets disturbed from that thin ribbon of habitat, it's got nowhere else to go. And also, an important part of the picture is what's happening nationally to purple sandpiper, in that it's about 50% decline in the last 25 years. So these are really sort of stark declines, which is also reflected on, what's happening to other shorebirds in the last sort of, 40 or 20 years. A lot of these declines are linked to what's happening in the breeding grounds, but also to do with the climate emergency as well. So I mentioned our guidance. So our guidance, we've tried to keep it really simple. So the aim is that people can still go out and enjoy the coast, but we're asking people to make really simple changes so that they can still enjoy their time at the coast, but without causing harm to wildlife. So first of all, we ask people to just simply look out for wildlife. Just by that act of looking out for wildlife, it means that people are more conscious of where the wildlife will actually be. I think it's very easy as being a coast user and a regular coast user, not necessarily to see where the birds are. So by looking out for wildlife, it just increases that consciousness that you're going into an area for nature. And that, secondly, we ask people to give the birds space. So research has shown if you give birds around about 40 or 50 metres space, then they're a lot less likely to fly away. And of course, that reduces sort of energy consumption. It means they can get on doing with what they want to do, which is sort of feed or rest. Thirdly, we ask people to follow our signage and any requests that we make. So these will be things like if we highlight an area is particularly important for feeding or nesting, we'll ask people to be particularly careful in those areas, or even ask people to put their dogs on leads in those areas as well. And finally, our last bit of guidance is that when crossing the dunes, we ask people to keep to the main paths. And this is really important because by doing so, that reduces the spread of Piri Piri Bur. So rather than spreading it right across the dunes, it just keeps it localised in certain discrete areas, and that's really important. So I mentioned dog ranges before, and this is something that we're really, really excited about. So I think Space for Shorebirds needs to come at it very positively when it comes to dog owners. I'm a dog owner. I always will be a dog owner, and I'm really passionate about. I think dogs are good for people, and I remember reading an article that Simon Barnes wrote, saying that dogs are conservationists, and I really understand what he means. Is because dogs get people outside, and by being outside, you can much more engage with nature. But there's no getting away from it. Actually, that taking the dogs to the coast, that can really be a significant impact to wildlife there. And in fact, research nationally has shown that around about 50% of bird disturbance involves a dog off lead. And from the visitor surveys that we've done, it shows that around about 65% of people visiting the coast will actually be there to walk their dogs. So this is a really, really important group for Space for Shorebirds to get involved in. So what we ask with dog ranges is for dog owners and their dogs to pledge not to chase the birds, first of all, and to give the birds space. And in return, we showcase them on social media, so our Instagram and our Facebook channels. And it's been a really successful part of what we do. We've had some good interaction between the different dog ranger owners, and some of it quite humorous and some of it light. But actually, it's really important because dog owners are there, sort of taking a stand and saying, actually, we're not only dog owners, but we're really passionate about wildlife as well. And I think that's really powerful. So if one part of our program or what we do can achieve anything, I want it to be this, because it is so important to Space for Shorebirds. So thank you for everybody who signed up to be a dog ranger so far. And if you own a dog and you think your dog would like to make the dog ranger pledge, then please do get in touch with us regarding that. So of course the dog ranger side is all very sort of positive and encouraging and engaging, but unfortunately we do have incidents where those sort of relationships and the situations will get quite serious. Now we do have enforcement powers to deal with these in the form of a public spaces protection order, which pretty much spans the entire county, and that's dogs on leads by direction. So that if we have an incident where a dog is off lead causing disturbance to wildlife, we can ask the dog owner to put the dog on a lead. And if they do that, that's fine. But if they don't and the dog continues to cause disturbance to wildlife, then that dog owner is actually liable for a fixed penalty notice. Now, it's a really sort of small aspect of what we do, but it's important that we've got this power. And I think it might be particularly important during the bird nesting season. And I think another thing to highlight is that other authorities and the other programs that I'd mentioned before don't actually have this particular power. So it is distinct and it is important, even though it is a small aspect of what we do. I hope we don't have to use this power a lot, but we'll see how things pan out. But it really, Space for Shorebirds is all about trying to reach people in a positive manner and trying to change the behavioural patterns, if you like, with positive encouragement rather than sort of the big stick of enforcement. So we're doing all this work, raising awareness. We're recruiting our dog rangers. We're present on social media, and we've also got our enforcement powers. But what we need to know fundamentally is the work we're doing, is it actually having an effect? Is it working? So a bit of the work that we're doing, around about 20% of all of our time is actually spent doing the survey work. So what we're attempting to come up with is a disturbance indices for each site. So that's the amount of disturbance per activity per bird which is disturbed. Now, that monitoring is on each of our focal sites every month, and I mentioned here the footprint ecology method. Essentially what it is we start off with a bird count, and then we do a recreation diary running alongside a disturbance diary. So we're noting all of the human behaviour that's happening within our focus area, so be it walkers or dog walkers, it might be a horse rider, it might be bait collection, and we'll log that, and then we'll note it against any disturbance that we can correlate to that particular activity. And it's really intensive, hard survey work. I've been a bird surveyor for the BTO for around about 15 years, and this is some of the hardest bird surveys that I've been involved in, because things can happen very, very quickly. If you've got 2 or 3 people on the beach doing different activities and you've got several groups of birds, you've got to have eyes in the back of your head trying to figure out what's disturbing what. And of course, the birds can fly off in a big group, so suddenly you might go, all right, there's a big group of birds. Okay, so that was 20 sandling, 15 dunlin, there was 5 purple sandpipers in there, and there was 5 turnstones, and they flew a long flight, and or they might have flown out of the area, and you're logging all of that information, and that's going towards in a big database, and this is really information that hasn't been gathered before within the county, so it could be really important data, and it's going to be ongoing monitoring work. Again, something which is distinct from other sort of monitoring programs is that for other mitigation services, that maybe they hire somebody in on periodic basis, and they'll maybe do surveys once every 5 years, whereas I think the strength with what we're doing is that we're keeping it absolutely ongoing right through the delivery. So we'll be able to get things out such as bird disturbance by species to find out if a species is being particularly affected, or bird disturbance by activity. So there might be a sudden change and there might be lots of bait collection at a particular location, and that will show up in our monitoring figures fairly quickly. So that will actually tell us as to where we need to direct our resources, both to the bird species or to the activities involved that people are carrying out. And I think a particular interesting bit is we're actually recording the breed of dog. Now, I think we've probably all got our own ideas as to which breed of dogs might cause particular issues. But by undertaking this work and recording the breed of dog, we can actually get some figures against that. And I'm not aware that any other study has done this before. So all of this is sort of at an early stage, but it from the early indications, it does seem as though we're going to get some valuable information out of this. As well as that sort of more formal monitoring, what we're also doing is we're mapping some of our coastal fields. So I'd mentioned purple sandpiper and turnstone when they're here during the non-breeding, the wintering season within the county. They don't really go away from the coastal strip. But if you contrast that with species like curlew and lapwing and golden plover, for example, they will quite readily use the coastal fields, and particularly sort of wet grassland fields or sometimes arable fields with some sort of wet features in there. And we're mapping those fields to figure out which are the most important fields, what species are using what fields, and that's going into a GIS system. So it's all really part of putting together a good picture of not only the disturbance but also the wider ecology of the shorebirds which are using the coast of Northumberland. Something which we're about to embark upon, which is sort of quite exciting work for us, because we missed out last season with the beginning of COVID, is our breeding bird protection scheme. So what I'm really aware of here is that there's that increasing recreation that presents a risk to shore nesting birds such as little tern and Arctic tern, and also ringed plover. And at the moment we've got all of our eggs in too few baskets, so we need new safe nesting areas. We need to establish new colonies of little terns, as has been highlighted in the species recovery plans. So our contribution towards that is the creation of new fenced areas. So these are sort of discrete areas that we think could be potentially valuable for these species. And the idea is that those small areas we can exclude people, and critically we can exclude dogs and off-lead dogs, because research internationally has shown just how important off-lead dogs are to causing harm to particularly breeding shore nesting birds, birds that are on eggs, or birds that have got live young or mobile young. It's a really big aspect trying to exclude the dogs from those areas. And as well as having planned sort of fenced nesting areas, what we're doing is as well we'll be monitoring the coast for any areas that are being prospected by ring plovers and prospected by little terns, and we'll be recruiting volunteers to help us with that. And in those areas we'd be looking to deploy sort of temporary fencing, just to provide some sort of cover and some sort of demarcation for people that actually these areas are potentially the start of what is a new colony, and to give those areas a bit more space and to put dogs on leads in those spaces as well. So that's going to be something that we go into over the next few months. And so if you'd like to get involved in that, if you contact Coast Care, and they'll be sort of recruiting people, and then we can feed into that. So we've talked about the non-breeding shorebirds during the wintering season. We've talked about the monitoring programs that we're doing, and we've also talked a little bit about the breeding bird program that we're involved in. So the final aspect that we're really involved in is the dune grasslands. And I don't want it to be thought of as an afterthought at all. It's very much integral to what Space for Shorebirds is about. We've got really important dune grasslands right from Druridge Bay right up to Cockleburn, and those are very supportive of a huge range of plants and invertebrates. So some fantastic butterflies, some fantastic plants that we've got there. And they're really under threat by a number of aspects. So lack of management. So if you go around and have a look at some of the dunes in Northumberland, some of them are really starting to scrub over, and they're losing the botanical interest. Some of them are becoming eroded both by coastal erosion, but also erosion by footfall. But a particular concern that we are worried about is the invasive species, which is Piri Piri Bur, which I'll mention in a moment. So the species that we've got photographed here is bloody cranesbill, which is a fabulous looking plant, isn't it? It grows in really dense drifts up and down the coast, and actually outside of those areas, even sort of further towards the south of the county. Blythe South Beach has got some really nice areas of bloody cranesbill. And it's a flower that we should all know. Probably most of you do know, and it's Northumberland's county flower, so it really is an important one. A plant that you see certainly a lot less of is purple milkvetch, and why this is important is that it's a really good indicator of where the dunes are in good condition. So where we find purple milkvetch, we know that, and we're doing things right in those areas. We're getting the grazing right, we've got the management right. So one thing we'll be involved in is actually helping to survey where purple milkvetch is present. And again, if you want to get involved with that, if you contact Coast Care, they will be able to coordinate the voluntary work to do with looking for purple milkvetch. And the sort of final plant, and this is where the sort of boos and hisses can come out. This is Piri Piri Bur, which quite a lot of you'll know about. It's an invasive species. It displaces the native plants. It came here around about 100 years ago from New Zealand. First started to spread prolifically on Holy Island, but really from what I can see, it's all over the county now. I've seen it on inland sites as well as coastal sites. And because the birds have got little hooks on, they attach to people's clothes and they attach to dogs. And dogs in particular, they can get really, really, completely stuck up with these Piri Piri Bur seeds. There's been instances where dogs have actually had to be shaved because they got so sort of tangled in the Piri Piri Bur. So if there's a species of plant that dog owners need to know about in Northumberland, I think Piri Piri Bur is it. Now, what we're doing is we're actually mapping Piri Piri Bur. So we've been involved in surveys up and down the coast, actually just mapping on a GIS where Piri Piri Bur is, and that's been sort of fed into information that Coast Care has got, where they can send out volunteers to actually take out the Piri Piri Bur, and we're going to be doing the same, actually removing the plants from the dunes physically. Incidentally, if you do get the burrs on you, the best thing to do is to really carefully pick them up and pop them in a bin. Quite often, being a dog owner, I've got a poo bag, and I'll if I get a load of Piri Piri Bur on me, I'll check my clothes really thoroughly, and I'll put all the burrs in the poo bag, tie the poo bag up, and then that will go in the bin. And our guidance, as I mentioned previously, to do with Piri Piri Bur really is to stay on the main paths when crossing the dunes, and this just prevents the plant being spread around the dunes. So that's sort of all what we're involved in at the moment. But what we can look forward to in the future, I think the big thing is really expanding our engagement to include events, and this is a part of what I'm really looking forward to, being involved in guided walks, so hopefully meeting some of you out on site and talking to you about the birds, being able to look through telescopes together and look at the birds when they're coming back from Scandinavia or Svalbard in their breeding conditions, looking absolutely fabulous. But also we'll be doing things like birding for dog owners. And this is just building on the idea that dogs are conservationists, so getting some dog owners together and helping those dog owners to really build up their knowledge and their appreciation of the birds that we've got here. And also, I'm really wanting to get involved in attending dog training classes, just have small parts of dog training classes whereby we can talk not only about being a responsible dog owner, as dog training classes are all about, but also, how to think about wildlife, how to reduce your impact on wildlife, because, dog owners, being somebody who's passionate about wildlife and somebody who's a dog owner aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they can go hand in paw, so to speak. Another thing that we'll be involved in is very much looking at the data that I mentioned before and the emerging trends that come up out of that data, and really, looking to see whether what we're doing is having an effect and adapting the way that we're doing space for shorebirds to what actually is emerging from the data. There's also a possibility of perhaps dog-free or dog-on lead zones within the county. This is something which has been talked around, around Europe and around the world. Northumberland at the moment is really seen as a dog-friendly place, and I think that should continue. And if there were to be dog-free zones or dog-on-lead zones, that would really need a lot of evidence behind it. So the monitoring work that we are doing will potentially contribute towards that evidence, either showing that it is necessary or it isn't necessary. And just to go back to Piri Piri Bur, we're looking to establish a Piri Piri Bur working group, because we are conscious that it's not just restricted to individual areas, and that having individual land managers and individual landowners dealing with the Piri Piri Bur problem doesn't really address it coastwide. So I think if we get together and really put our heads together as a good working group, then I think that'll be more successful than working in isolation. So we've talked about, the background to Space for Shorebirds. We've talked about what we're involved in now and what we're looking to do in the future. The final part is part 3, which is, how you can help and how you can get involved. So the last thing to sort of stress is just how important people are to Space for Shorebirds, and that we really need people to get involved. People like yourself. We're asking you to share our guidance, to join the dog rangers. So if you are a dog owner, to get involved with us, to message us, and also to volunteer in those tasks that I've mentioned. So be it going out and looking for nesting little terns or nesting ring plover, to the removal of Piri Piri Bur or surveying for Piri Piri Bur. Please do get involved. It's really important work. But also give us your backing on social media. We try and make our social media offering, really interesting and varied. Trying to sort of share the lives of the birds as it's happening, because we're at the coast all of the time. We're able to share how the weather conditions are impacting the birds. So do get involved with us that way. So give us a like and a share on Facebook or Instagram and Twitter, and that will really help us along. So finally, just thank you very much for listening. And if you would like to contact us, there's our contact details. Certainly, if you search on Google for Space for Shorebirds, you'll certainly find lots of ways to contact us there. Thank you very much.